The majority of Chautauqua County is dependent on the annual precipitation for its water resources. The only parts of the county that don't depend specifically on the water that falls within Chautauqua County are those people along the Conewango in the vicinity of Kennedy and Frewsburg, and those people along Lake Erie. All the remainder of the county must rely on the annual precipitation. Let me give you a sense of the annual precipitation. In parts of Chautauqua County, we get somewhere between 37 and 42 inches of rain on average. At a given water measuring station or weather station in Chautauqua County, we've had as little as 28 inches of rain in a year, or precipitation, because it includes everything that falls of water, or we've had as much as 60 inches of rain at a particular measuring station. That doesn't give you much sense of what it means, but let me try and describe it to you. If you own an acre of land is 210 feet by 210 feet in round numbers. On that acre of land, if you're in the upland area of the county, you receive 42 inches of rain a year. If you're on the Lake Erie shore, your average fall is about 37 inches of rain a year. 1 inch of rain, or somewhere between 10 and 12 inches on average of snow, which makes up 1 inch of precipitation, on your acre of land, 1 inch of rain or precipitation gives you 3,630 cubic feet of water, or 27,000 gallons, or 226,000 pounds of water. So if you're in the upland area of Chautauqua County, in a given year, you end up with 9.5 million pounds of water falling on your property. That turns out to be 1,140,000 gallons. Or, if you like it the other way, 152,000 cubic feet of water. Where did it all go? Well, in the last week of, or this week of January, we watched it go in a number of instances. The vast majority of people in the upland portions of Chautauqua County rely on groundwater for their supply. Along the lake shore, there is no good groundwater resource that a municipality can tap. In fact, if you live on Route 5, almost the full length of Chautauqua County, unless you're involved in an old pre-glacial buried valley, you have a problem of water service if you have your own well. You hope that you're on a public water supply, because the water just is not there. We have to go back to the glacial history of the county to understand how our water resources have been developed. Realize that we had several through valleys in the county prior to glaciation, and after the glaciers retreated, they plugged up the through valleys. These through valleys are represented by the French Creek drainage, by the Chautauqua Lake Trough, and by the Cassadaga and the Conewango Troughs. The Conewango Trough, of course, being partially in Cattaraugus County. But as the glaciers came and went, they made various types of deposits. And let me give you an idea of the extremes. If you live in Hartfield Bay, near the big inlet, and you want to drill a well, you drill down somewhere in the neighborhood of 130 feet, plus or minus, and you run into 6 or 8 inches of very sharp stone, and that's where you get your water. If you're down in the vicinity of the Riverside Road, in the town of Kyantone, where the Burgesson Sanctuary is located, there you have to go, in order to get adequate water for the Roger Torrey Peterson Interpretive Building there, they went down some 335 feet and then acquired a sharp lens of gravel. Conversely, if you go to the Boy Scout camp at Camp Mers, one day we were planning the development of a hot shower building, and we said, well, what type of disposal method do we need in order to be environmentally correct on the campgrounds? And the answer was, well, go out and find out what the soils are like. So I went out and diligently drilled a series of holes down 32 inches. and poured water in as prescribed for what they call a percolation test. And I came back an hour later, and the water hadn't changed its level. I came back 4 hours later, and the water hadn't changed its level. I came back the next day, and the water hadn't changed its level. So it was beginning to look like whatever we were going to use for water disposal, there was going to be a very expensive undertaking. The chairman at the time said, well, dig a little deeper and see what you find. Well, I dug down another 8 inches, and guess what I encountered? I encountered 6 inches of sharp gravel. And I poured water in it, it disappeared. I poured buckets of water in it, and it disappeared. I had a 50-gallon tub of water brought out, and we sat there and we poured it in it, and it disappeared. This, of course, is July and August. The following March and April, with the spring thaw, the whole flowed artesian from the area around it. The waters were so high around it that the water was coming up out of the hole. So we ended up with a very, very unique water disposal system for the hot shower and the Boy Scout camp. But that's the range of experience that we can get. Behind me, we have a series of multicolored maps that are part of the groundwater resource study of the Jamestown area that was done by the U.S. Geological Survey under the authorship of Leslie J. Crane, which is the most detailed exploration of groundwater resources in the county. Again, all influenced by the glaciers. The groundwater in the uplands of Chautauqua County are basically in the pre-glacial troughs. In a number of instances, in the case of the Cassadaga River flowing from the lakes down through and out of the county, that stream or creek, whichever title you want to use for it, is not in hydrological contact with the groundwater area of the Jamestown well field. The water flowing in the creek does not enter the groundwater. In the case, you have to look at the geology and the action of the glaciers coming and going and the creation of various systems of veins along the edges of the valley, and as the streams pass over the deltas, the water percolates down into the groundwater resource, which is the Jamestown Aquifer, which is down at about 130 some odd feet. The water is drawn up and used by the city. Over the years, by the way, we've at one point the report was created because we were looking at a shortage possibly. The Jamestown well field wells, when they were first drilled, were artesian in character. There was enough water held in the infiltration areas on a year-round basis that the wells, literally when they drilled them, the water came up, and in some instances as much as 3 feet above the ground and just bubbled and flowed. We're using millions of gallons of water out of that resource today. The fact of the matter is that the Jamestown well fields now supply Faulkner, the city of Jamestown, parts of the town of Ellicott, parts of the village of Lakewood, and all the way out to Cummings Engine. Water is moving from the Jamestown well field. That's probably our most important. It's one of the major well fields and aquifers in the state of New York. Along the lake plain, the majority of municipalities use reservoirs and reservoir systems. However, I say that now I'm going to contradict myself because I just realized that the village of Silver Creek has contracted with an Erie County Water Authority, and they are abandoning their watershed program because of a number of problems that they've had with it. And they're now will be getting their water supply from the Erie County Water Authority. But you move over to the village of Fredonia, and the village of Fredonia has a reservoir and relies on Canada Way Creek as its water supply. The city of Dunkirk goes to Lake Erie. The village of Brockton has hundreds of acres of watershed, and they also have legal rights to tap Bear Lake in years that their watershed might be too low. They have access to Bear Lake and a pipe to Bear Lake so that they can draw water if they have to. In the 35 years that I've been in Chautauqua County, they've never had to turn to that reservoir, however, or to that lake as part of their water supply. The village of Westfield has a unique system of several reservoirs and the ability to take the waters out of the Chautauqua Creek. However, the state of New York would like the village of Westfield to abandon the creek as a watershed and water resource. They would like them to turn to Lake Erie because they feel that the Chautauqua Creek watershed is a unique area that they can use for restocking certain fish in Lake Erie, and they would like the village out of there totally. I don't think it's going to happen in the near future, however. The hamlet of Ripley has a reservoir system also. Now, when we begin to look at other places, we have municipalities that don't have water systems as a public system. They are private in character. Or we have hamlets that may have water systems. The hamlet of Clymer has a water system. The hamlet of Frewsburg has a water system. Sinclairville has a water system. Westfield does. Mayville, by the way, wonderful, wonderful Mayville, has probably the best water in the state of New York, no matter what they say at the state fair on an annualized basis. The water that we now have, we don't chlorinate, we don't flocculate, we don't do anything to it, but bring it up and distribute it to the people of the village of Mayville. And it's neat because you don't have to taste chlorine or any of the chemistry that's used in flocculation in order to give the water the quality that the state says you have to have. So at this point, the village of Mayville still has a permit from the state of New York to give you water right out of the Mayville aquifer, which, by the way, is, many people don't realize it, but it's the Mud Creek and all the way up to the Conservation Club that is the aquifer area that serves the village of Mayville. On the maps behind me in blue are estimates of groundwater availability. Now realize that I've just said to you that we're talking about annual precipitation as the resource. Somewhere, depending upon when the precipitation falls, the manner in which it falls, a percentage of it gets into the groundwater. Because we are totally glaciated, we have a boundary layer between the glacial soils and the bedrock of Chautauqua County. And in this boundary layer or rubber layer is a great amount of water resource. To give you an example, when we were building the addition to the courthouse, which is now known as the Gerasi office building, the architects had suggested that we spend almost $250,000 for sub-drainage because the bottom story of the building was going to pass not only through the rubble layer but into the ground stone of the area. And one of the members of the building committee said, we don't have to spend that $250,000 for that. And I pleaded with them, don't underestimate the amount of water that is flowing through there. Spend the $250,000. It'll be a wise investment over time. And I assure you that the basement has stayed much drier than it would have if they had taken that $250,000 investment out. In fact, if you remember the history of the building of the addition of the jail to the county jail complex, they had a water problem, and I have a feeling that it happened after I had disappeared from county government and somebody didn't remind them that they were building in the boundary layer or possibly into the base stone of the county. And there's an awful lot of water there. On the maps in blue behind me, you get different gradations of water. This again is a map that was created for the groundwater resource of the Jamestown. And the darker blue you get, the more water availability there is. Basically, the light blue areas, you're talking about a maximum of 5 gallons per minute. And as you get into the bluer and deeper areas and the hatchet areas, and we're now approaching the Jamestown well field, we're talking about hundreds and hundreds of gallons of water a minute available to us. As I noted in that particular feature, the Jamestown well field, was artesian when it was first developed. If you read the history of the village of Cherry Creek, they talk about the fact that you could drive a well almost any place and get an artesian well. If you look at the original promotion of Oriental Park next to Bemis Point on Chautauqua Lake, they're proud of the fact that all you have to do is drive a well point and you have an artesian flowing well. I'm sorry to say today there have been enough holes poked into that area that they may still flow artesian under peculiar weather conditions, but in general we have very few areas of artesian wells left in Chautauqua County. Last year in August and September, in September particularly, we had very little rain, and some of our outlying areas that were depending on wells had a very difficult time. When in the early 60s we had low precipitation, and I can remember farmers in the Clymer area particularly, even though they were in an area that supposedly had some groundwater resource, it was failing them. They couldn't get enough for their cattle. Imagine if you own an acre of land, and you have an average year. Watch out for average, they're terrible. I'd rather say we've registered as little as 28 inches of rain a year. We've measured as much as 60 inches of annual precipitation. But for planning purposes, you go to average. If you own an acre of land and you're in the uplands of the county, you're talking about the fact that you're going to look at 9.5 million pounds of water in a given year. And that as a resource is rather interesting. But you're not going to be able to capitalize on it all. Somewhere between 40 and 60% of it is going to go off in runoff across the surface. Somewhere between 5 and 15% is going to go down into the groundwater. And somewhere between 20 and 30%, and if you add those all up, you'll find I'm dealing with more than 100%. But you wobble between the numbers. Goes back in evapotranspiration. And the fact of the matter is that those areas that are dependent on the groundwater have got to realize that the groundwater recharge basically takes place before leaf out and doesn't again begin to take place until many of the leaves have left the trees. Just imagine a tree, and if you were to take that tree and take all of the leaves on it and spread it out over a flat surface, what you might have in a single tree. A tree, we're talking about transpiring in its photosynthesis process of using hundreds and thousands of gallons of water a day in its process. In some areas in Chautauqua County, there's very little ability for the annual precipitation to percolate through the soil, or it ends up saturating the soil and it changes the vegetation that grows on it. There are many areas in Chautauqua County, when you talk about water resources, you've got to kind of play a little game with the soils as well as what's happening on the surface. And I don't know quite how to integrate that process. The people that could do it would be Dave Wilson and his crew down at the Ag Center at the Jamestown Airport. And one of these days we'll talk about the soils of Chautauqua County in a very limited basis. We won't get Dave up here with his great technological knowledge and Larry Brown and the whole crew from down there. But there's an interplay between the types of soils you have on the surface and what you're going to get in the way of recharge. I irritated the well drillers of Chautauqua County not too many years ago by creating a model and saying, if we have a family of 3.18 persons per household, which is what we had in earlier censuses, we're now down to 2.56 persons per household in Chautauqua County, by the way, which blows my mind, but that's what's happened to our family size. But when we had this more than 3-person family, and we put them on an acre of land, and we assumed a 10% percolation of water supply, the water supply was able to keep up with that family. It was able to recharge to the point that you really didn't have a deficit. And of course the well driller said, but you're not talking about the whole surrounding area in which this acre of land exists. I said, yes, that's true, but I want to talk about a model, and I want to talk about the people that are living on a hilltop, because we have at least one hill ridge in Chautauqua County where the vast majority of homes have set their wells down 3 times because their density was too intense. And when the subdivider subdivided the land, he wasn't looking at what its groundwater resource was. Anyway, the one family on an acre of land, that's a lot 210 feet by 210 feet square. Somebody's going to do the math on that and they're going to say, John, you're wrong. You're right. It's 209 point something feet, but that's immaterial. That one family on that model acre of land is not going to deplete their groundwater resources if you're talking about normal family consumptive patterns. Realize that when you flush the toilet, unless you have a water saver toilet, you're talking about anywhere from 5 to 8 gallons of water. That's more water in that one flush than the vast majority of the households of the world have access to unless they walk to a village well or to a village stream or some other point. And you think nonchalantly of flushing 5 to 7 gallons of water. We use water. By the way, the problem that we create when we flush it and mix it with 5 to 7 gallons of water gives us a real sewer bill, whether you're on an individual septic system or in a municipal system. Because now we've got to take all of that material that you flushed down, and we've got to take it out, and we've got to return the water to the environment in a clean condition. Anyway, here we are at this density of 1 family to the acre. And this is when we had more than 3 people to the family. If we cut that in half and say that you only have to be on a lot 100 by 210 feet, now all of a sudden that isolated acreage does not produce at a 10% infiltration rate enough water for that family to have a groundwater system that isn't going to deplete and get lower and lower and lower and lower and lower. And eventually the question is, will it exhaust? No, it won't exhaust when you take it and put it in the general environment, on a side hill, in a valley, but on a hilltop, you could have a water problem. So you have that model. We don't realize when we design a water system as a public system, the rule of thumb for generations has been, we'll design the water system at 100 gallons per capita on an annual consumption basis, on a daily basis, I'm sorry. So you're talking about a lot of water. Now that includes the industrial use, the commercial use, any other type of activity that may be going on in the community. The other day, the village of Mayville reported its water consumption at 5.9 million gallons. We don't have 17,000 people in the village, or 1,700 people in the village, but I divided 17 into that number, and it ended up being that the water pumpage, the water production from our well field is at 113 gallons per person. And my question is, like all water systems, ours has leaks in it. And by the way, as we handle water in the various manners in which we do, we have leaks and we have infiltrations. When we talk about a water resource and the utilization of the water resource, and we look at the design of a sewer system, again, we use that number, 100 gallons of water per day per capita for the community, unless we know we have extensive industrial demand for that particular water. As we use the water and we take the water and distribute it to the community, we lose water through leaks. Even though we may have built a watertight cast iron distribution system or asbestos or plastic, depending upon where you look in Chautauqua County, the water distribution system may have 3 different materials in the distribution system. We built the distribution system originally just to get people to have water. So in some places we've got pipes that are measured in 1.5 inches, 2 inches, 3 inches. But today, when a water system is built, they're saying, give us minimum fire protection if it's a municipal system. And in order to have minimal fire protection, you basically have to have an 8-inch pipe, except in some crossover areas where you should have you can use a 6-inch pipe in order to get general water pressure throughout the community. And by the way, we have communities with water supply systems that the people think they have fire protection, but they don't. Because of the age of the pipes, over the years, because of the chemistry of the water running through the distribution system, we get a buildup of organisms. In fact, we've got little creatures that live on the sides of the pipes that every once in a while in some systems we've got to go in and literally scratch them out in order to get the capacity of the pipes back. Okay, we bring the water to the user. Oh boy, wonderful. And we use it, and we don't think anything of it. Even the water bills that we have don't shock us. Now we've used it. Now we've mixed it with something. I can remember not too many years ago, well, it's several decades, that the people that had the incinerator had an ad, lower your waste disposal cost, use an incinerator. And but at that point in time, the solution to a municipal sewer problem, the most acceptable solution was just dilution in some receiving water. And at that time we were basically using primary sewage treatment plants that only settled out 65% of the solids. Anyway, we've now used the water and we're going to send it to our disposal place. And I would tell you there are still places in the United States where communities collect their sewage and just put it into a receiving water. In fact, some of the West Coast states and some of the communities have lobbied the Congress and EPA and are allowed to discharge only with primary treatment because there's so much ocean water out there for dilution purposes. But that's not the case in Chautauqua County or in New York State. If you have a municipal sewer system, you're going to have to treat it to a particular level. In the vast majority of instances in Chautauqua County, we're talking about secondary sewage treatment plants or advanced secondary sewage treatment plants, where as the water is returned to the receiving waters, we have settled out 85% of the solids. And in some instances where the plants are still well below their design capacity, we're talking about settling out 90% of the solids, which is much better than any other previous civilization has done as they deal with a municipal sewer system. Anyway, as we run that water from our homes and our businesses back to the sewage treatment plant, those pipes, after a few years, begin to have leaks. So we have inflow and infiltration. We also have the fact that everybody has not cleaned up their act and they've not disconnected their sump pump from the sewage line, they have not disconnected their footer drains from the sewer line, and they've not disconnected their downspouts from the sewer line. All three of those should not go to your sewer system. Those should be disposed of in some other manner, either in a French drain on your property or discharged to the surface stormwater system of your particular municipality. One of the things that we are ignoring about our water resources, and I don't know how the thaw played out in Dunkirk, Fredonia this week, but we are crowding our streams and our drainage areas too tightly. And we are allowing people to build in the floodplains of these streams, although with the federal flood insurance we've made some corrective actions there. But we are channelizing these streams much too tightly. Realize that if we talk about Crooked Brook, which serves parts of the village of Fredonia and the town of Dunkirk and the city of Dunkirk and the town of Dunkirk and the town of Arkwright, realize that Crooked Brook starts way up in the hills of the town of Arkwright. And as you get more and more development up in the areas upstream of the city of Dunkirk, the runoff rates become more dynamic. In fact, one of the places that we've recognized runoff and runoff problems has been in the development of the town of Ellicott. And I take my hat off to Fran Rue and the Chautauqua Lake Conservancy Group that, not Fran Rue, the supervisor, Fran Morgan, who has done a wonderful job of dealing with the runoff in the development of the commercial area in the town of West Ellicott. We've got to look at the water resources not only as something that we use, but something that we have to respect. streams have got to be backed off from, development has got to be pulled back from, or never allowed to get into the floodplains of the smaller streams. And as we build our new bridges or reconstruct our bridges, we've got to design them in such a manner that they do not contribute to creation of ice dams and this type of thing. So when you're looking at water resources, we're not only talking about how we're going to use it, we're going to talk about how it functions in the general system. And we've got to become more and more respectful of it. Our wetlands, our floodplains are all part of our important water resource system of the county.